You know, to be guilty of a crime, it takes more than just committing a forbidden act. The law says you also have to have a guilty mind, or what lawyers call mens rea. But what on earth does that actually mean? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
Picture this. A surgeon is in the middle of a complex, risky operation, and tragically, the patient dies. Then, across town, a hitman takes aim, pulls the trigger, and their target is killed. The physical result in both cases is exactly the same. Someone has died. So why is one a tragedy and the other is murder? The entire difference lies in what was going on in their heads.
And the answer, well, it all boils down to this incredibly simple but powerful legal formula. For a crime to exist, you need two ingredients. First, you need the guilty act itself, the physical part, what the law calls the actus reus. And second, you need the guilty mind, the mens rea. That mental component, that's the whole ballgame.
So, let's dive in. How do courts actually try to figure out what someone was thinking? Well, the first approach is what's known as subjective mens rea. This is all about trying to get inside the accused person's head and figure out what was actually going on in there.
The law basically has two ways of looking at this guilty mind idea. First, you've got subjective mens rea, which, as we said, is all about the person's actual state of mind. This is absolutely critical for serious crimes like murder. But then there's objective mens rea. And here, the law doesn't really care what you were thinking, it cares about what a normal, reasonable person should have been thinking. This is way more common for offenses like, say, dangerous driving.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that subjective fault isn't just a simple on or off switch. Nope, it's more like a ladder, a hierarchy of blameworthiness. You see, the law views someone who is just aware of a risk very differently than someone who flat out intended for something bad to happen. So let's climb this ladder, starting from the bottom.
Okay, so starting at the first rung, we've got recklessness. And let's be clear, this is not just being careless or clumsy. In legal terms, recklessness means you saw potential danger, you understood the risk you were about to take, and you decided to do it anyway. You consciously rolled the dice.
Moving up a step, we have knowledge. This one's pretty straightforward. It just means you were aware of a key fact that makes your action illegal. For example, to be found guilty of assaulting a police officer, you generally have to know the person you're assaulting is, in fact, a police officer. That little piece of knowledge is a crucial ingredient.
But what if you try not to know something? What if you deliberately stick your head in the sand? Well, the law has a fantastic name for this: willful blindness. The courts basically say, sorry, you can't escape guilt by intentionally ignoring the truth. If you strongly suspect something's up and choose not to look, you might as well have known. And here we are, at the very top of the ladder, the most blameworthy state of mind of all: intent. This is the big one. It means the illegal act wasn't just a risk you were willing to take, it was your purpose, your goal. You meant to do it.
This brings up something that people mix up all the time: the difference between intent and motive. Intent is the what. Your intent was to steal the bread. Motive is the why. You did it to feed your family. Now, for figuring out if you're guilty, the law almost only ever cares about the intent. Your motive, the why, might come up later at sentencing, but a good motive doesn't make an illegal act legal.
Okay, but what about when things go wrong? Let's say you try to punch someone, but they duck and you accidentally hit the person standing behind them. What then? Well, the law has this nifty little trick called transferred intent. It basically says your guilty mind, your intent to hit the first person, just transfers over to the person you actually hit. Your intent followed the punch. All right, so far we have been deep inside a person's individual mind. Now let's completely flip the script and talk about objective mens rea. This is where the court stops asking what you were thinking and starts asking what a reasonable person in your shoes should have been thinking.
To make that call, the law invented a legendary character, the reasonable person. Now, this isn't a real person. You can't call them to testify. They are a legal fiction, a hypothetical yardstick of normal, everyday prudence and common sense. Everyone's actions get measured against this standard.
And here's the crucial part. This standard is pretty much one size fits all. Your personal quirks, your age, your level of education, your past experiences, they generally don't matter. The only time that might change is if a personal trait makes you truly incapable of understanding the risk you're creating. So now we can start putting all these pieces together, the subjective stuff and the objective stuff, and see how the law creates a whole scale of blameworthiness. The physical act can be exactly the same, but where you land on this scale depends entirely on your state of mind.
This scale really shows you how high the bar is to move from a simple mistake to a criminal act. Just a basic departure from what a reasonable person would do, that might get you sued. That's civil negligence. But for it to be a crime, like dangerous driving, your conduct has to be a marked departure from that standard. And for the most serious offenses, it has to be a marked and substantial departure, something that shows a wanton or reckless disregard for other people's lives.
So how does a court actually figure this out? It really boils down to a two-part test. Two pretty simple questions. First, would a reasonable person in that exact situation have seen the risk? And if the answer is yes, then question 2. Was the accused's failure to see or avoid that risk a marked departure from what we'd expect of a reasonable person?
Okay, for our last piece of the puzzle, we're going to look at a really interesting, kind of mind-bending timing issue. You see, for a crime to actually happen, the guilty act and the guilty mind can't just exist separately. They have to happen at the exact same time.
This is what lawyers call the principle of concurrence. The actus reus, the act, and the mens rea, the mind. They have to line up perfectly. Now, that sounds simple enough, right? You decide to do something, then you do it. But the courts have seen some seriously weird cases where the timing gets all jumbled up.
For a perfect example, just look at the truly bizarre case of Mei Li. This one is a real head-scratcher. A group of guys attack someone, intending to kill him. Believing he's dead, they decide to roll his body off a cliff to stage an accident. But here's the twist. He wasn't dead from the attack. He actually died from the fall. The defense argued, hey, when we pushed him, we thought he was a corpse, so we didn't have intent to kill at that moment. The court didn't buy it. They ruled the whole thing was one continuous transaction, and that original intent to kill just carried through the entire series of events.
Which brings us to one last thought to chew on. Imagine a hunter out in the woods. They see a rustle in the bushes, and they honestly, truly believe it's a deer. They fire, but it was another person. Now, the hunter had no subjective intent, no desire to harm a person. But should they have been more careful? How would the objective standard of a reasonable hunter apply here? Can an honest mistake really wipe the slate clean of all blame? And that is the complex world of the guilty mind.